The horse began to trample the coffin. When the lid broke, people heard someone crying. Henry was a 60-year-old man who lived on a cozy farm with his family. From a very young age, he had always felt passionate about the animals around him. In his childhood, he spent much of the early mornings in the stables, grooming the horses and giving them everything they needed. It was there that he discovered his great passion: horses. Over time, Henry learned more and more about how to care for animals and, above all, how to treat them with respect and affection. His parents, who were also passionate about country life, taught their son everything they knew. When they passed away, Henry inherited the farm, taking on not only the land, but also the traditions it carried. Determined to keep his family's legacy alive, Henry continued raising horses, cattle, and other animals with the same love he had felt in his childhood. His mornings were always very busy, feeding the animals, cleaning the stables, and organizing everything to ensure the farm ran smoothly. Even though he had help from family and employees, he insisted on overseeing every detail because he believed that a good farmer must always be present. Thus, Henry grew, matured, and became a man respected by everyone in the region. Those who knew him were aware that in addition to being a great farmer, he was also a loyal friend, always ready to help anyone in need. But out of all the things Henry admired on the farm, horses always held a special place in his heart. When Henry was 48, he overheard a conversation that left him worried. There was a newborn foal so sick that its owners intended to put it down rather than spend more money and time on its care. It was a very frail little horse that could barely stand and could hardly see. In addition, its mother had died shortly after giving birth, making the situation even more difficult. While others said the foal wouldn't survive long, Henry felt his heart tighten. He knew saving the animal would be a big challenge, but he couldn't accept the idea that the poor foal had no chance. Ignoring the previous owner's advice, Henry decided to buy the foal, believing that with love, patience, and proper care, perhaps it could have a longer life. And so, without hesitation, Henry took the foal to his own farm, determined to do everything in his power to help it. Although many considered him crazy for risking time and resources, Henry didn't mind the criticism. He had always had a compassionate heart and above all believed that every life deserved a chance to fight and overcome challenges. Henry took the foal, now named Duke, to his farm's stable, determined to do whatever it took to save him. As soon as they arrived, he called the best veterinarian in the region to take a look at Duke. The specialist examined the animal carefully, took his temperature, checked his cloudy eyes, and made a diagnosis that would have been a cold bucket of water to anyone. Duke was extremely weak, and the doctor believed he had little chance of survival. Even so, Henry was not willing to give up. He remembered how he had cared for many other sick horses throughout his life and sensed that Duke, as fragile as he looked, had a sort of light in his eyes. Armed with all his experience and love for animals, Henry began an intensive care routine. He rented equipment to help feed the foal, bought special dietary supplements, and spent more nights in the stable than in his own bedroom. He used to say that if Duke had to go, he would at least go knowing that someone cared for him. The first few days were hard. Duke did not respond well to the medication, showed no appetite, and several times almost collapsed completely. However, Henry never ran out of patience. He spoke softly to the foal, told him stories about the farm, described the green fields where Duke would run when he grew strong and healthy. It might sound like the dream of a hopeful man, but Henry believed his kind words made Duke feel loved and helped him fight for his life. To the surprise of many, including the vet, the foal began to show signs of improvement. First, Duke started lifting his head more often, and although he was still very weak, he was already showing interest in what was going on around him. Soon after, he began drinking water and special milk without as much difficulty. Neighbors, who initially thought Henry's persistence strange, became excited about the animal's progress. Some even brought carrots or apples, so Duke would have a bit more in his diet. As the weeks went by, there was a turning point. Duke managed to stand on his own, even if only for a few seconds. Everyone celebrated it like a huge victory, especially Henry, who discreetly wiped away a tear as he watched the foal take his first steps. From then on, Duke regained his strength quickly. His once dull coat grew shinier, his eyes were no longer so cloudy, and he began to whinny whenever he saw Henry approaching, a sign of genuine friendship. Months turned into years, and Duke grew into a tall, strong, and very playful horse. He loved running across the fields, leaping over small streams as if wanting to prove how energetic he was. Henry, for his part, felt proud every time he saw him galloping in the distance, remembering when the veterinarian had said Duke might not survive the first week. It was impossible not to notice the closeness between man and horse. As soon as one called, the other promptly responded. It was as though the time they spent together, fighting for Duke's survival, had forged a bond no one else could break. Henry spoke to the horse as if talking to an old friend, and Duke responded with whinnies and gentle movements, showing total trust. Those long days and nights of treatment and affection had turned the sick foal into a healthy and loyal horse, and it also brought Henry closer to the essence of a caring farmer. Thus, Duke's miraculous recovery became a story known in the region. There were many people who visited the farm just to see with their own eyes the horse that had come back to life, thanks to Henry's perseverance. And every time someone asked about the secret to his success, Henry simply smiled and said that, however advanced veterinary medicine was, nothing surpassed the power of love, patience, and the will to live. As the years went by, life on the farm continued at a peaceful pace. Duke grew stronger and healthier each day, and Henry took special joy in seeing him gallop across the fields he loved so much. Everything seemed to be in harmony until one day, Henry began to feel intense chest pains and constant fatigue. At first he tried to brush it off, thinking it was just tiredness. However, the symptoms grew more evident. Henry could no longer get out of bed with the same energy as before, and even simple tasks left him short of breath. When his family realized the seriousness of the situation, they took Henry to the local doctor. After a series of tests, they received the news no one wanted to hear. Henry was gravely ill and needed complete rest. The doctors warned him to avoid any exertion or stress because his heart was weak and he was at risk if he kept working too hard on the farm. Henry's family, worried, came together to care for both him and the animals. His children, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, and even the farm workers split up the tasks Henry used to do by himself. The mornings, once marked by the strong figure of the farmer walking through the stables, now went on without him. This created a void in the atmosphere, as everyone was accustomed to seeing him around wearing that worn-out hat and a smile on his face. Henry's absence from the daily routine affected not only the people but Duke as well, who seemed uneasy. Used to having his owner always nearby, the horse did not understand why Henry did not appear at the stable as before. Instead of receiving his gentle morning care and calm talk, Duke found himself surrounded by other voices, which, while friendly, did not have the same warmth. Touchingly, the horse showed incredible sensitivity. Almost every day, he found a way to approach the house and stay near Henry's window as if wanting to see his friend, even if only for a moment. When Henry sat on the porch to get some fresh air and try to regain his strength, Duke would slowly approach and lie down beside him in silence. There was something very special in that scene. It was as if the horse sensed his owner's weakness and wanted to offer his presence, ensuring that, even while sick, Henry wasn't alone. The family felt moved to see such a sincere connection between man and horse. Meanwhile, the farm workers did their best to keep everything in order. They knew how important the farm was to Henry and wanted him not to worry. Still, Henry grew anxious because he had always liked to supervise every aspect of the work. Occasionally, he asked them to help him to the corral, just to check if the horses were being properly cared for. But his body couldn't handle standing for very long, and soon he had to return to bed. Despite the pain and limitations, Henry found enormous comfort in Duke's unwavering presence. The horse showed a silent yet very powerful affection. He didn't whinny loudly or become agitated. He just stayed close like a friend who was there through thick and thin. On some nights, when insomnia and worry kept Henry awake, all he had to do was look out the window to see Duke outside, as if watching over his owner. This simple gesture gave Henry a spark of hope, reminding him that even in the hardest moments, there is always some force that helps us go on. So while Henry fought for his life and the family struggled to keep the farm afloat, Duke remained loyal. For everyone around them, the story underscored the importance of love, care, and presence in the toughest moments. After all, each day Henry faced his illness was also a new opportunity to realize that friendship, whether between people or even between a man and his horse, can be the best medicine for the soul. Time passed, and despite all the care, Henry remained weak. One seemingly normal morning, he felt severe chest pain while sitting on the porch, watching the animals on the farm. Before he could ask for help, he fainted. His family panicked when they saw him collapse and tried everything to revive him. They called the town doctor, but sadly there was no sign of life. News of Henry's death spread quickly through the region. After all, everyone knew him and admired him for his kindness and willingness to help anyone in need. In a matter of minutes, neighbors and friends arrived to support the family. A wave of sorrow and surprise washed over them all. Nobody could believe that the strong man who had once saved a foal from death was now gone so suddenly. Still in shock, the family was forced to carry out the traditional rites. They hired a small local funeral agency and started organizing the wake. People tidied up the house, placed flowers around, and prepared a simple coffin, crafted with great care. Henry had always been humble and liked simpler things, so they felt that a more natural approach matched his way of living. Meanwhile, the whole town was talking about what had happened. Many remembered stories in which Henry had helped solve problems on farms or given advice on how to care for sick animals. Each person brought a fond memory, making the atmosphere even more emotional. Visitors arrived bearing cakes, coffee, and comforting words. But the family remained devastated, trying to understand how this had happened so suddenly. That night, they placed Henry's body in the coffin in the main room so people could pay their respects. Everyone waited for the funeral, scheduled for the next morning at the local cemetery. Little did they know that something very strange and surprising was about to happen, shaking everyone's emotions and transforming that moment of mourning into a scene no one could have imagined. The morning of the burial began quietly, with a few cars driving slowly along the dirt road. Henry's closest relatives and friends walked with their heads bowed, paying their respects to the man they all believed had departed so suddenly. In the small wooden coffin lay Henry's body, surrounded by flowers picked from the farm's garden. The mood was one of deep sadness, as no one had expected him to leave so soon. Back at the farm, Duke wouldn't stop whinnying. The horse seemed to know something terrible was happening. Some workers tried to keep him in the stable, but Duke fought with all his strength to break free, striking his hooves against the wooden doors. It didn't take long before, with a stronger blow, the horse broke down the gate and bolted in a full gallop toward the cemetery. Those who saw Duke pass noticed the desperation in his eyes, as though he were racing against time to prevent something terrible. When the funeral procession was nearly at the cemetery, people began to hear, off in the distance, the sound of hooves striking the dry earth. Before they could understand what was happening, Duke appeared like a flash of lightning, galloping without restraint. The crowd was startled. Some elderly women screamed in fright, children clung to their mothers. The horse cut through the people, knocking over anyone in his path until he reached Henry's coffin. It was as if he were driven by an urgency no one could explain. In an act that shocked everyone, Duke began to trample the coffin. He pounded the lid with such force that the wooden boards began to split. The noise was loud and the scene resembled a nightmare. Some tried to pull the horse away, but Duke resisted, driven by unknown strength and determination. In just a few seconds, the lid of the coffin gave way, splintering and partially revealing Henry's body. Panic spread like wildfire. Some ran away in fear of being hit. Others shouted for someone to immediately restrain the horse. The scene was total chaos. Flowers and funeral wreaths lay scattered on the ground, people were crying, and no one knew where to go. Duke kept whinnying, seemingly consumed by a mix of fury and pain. Nobody there had ever seen the animal behave this way before. It was a shock to everyone, because Duke was known for being calm and affectionate, especially with Henry. The family, amid the shock, tried to soothe the horse, but to no avail. Each attempt to approach only increased Duke's agitation, causing him to thrash around the coffin he had broken apart. A few braver men managed to lasso the horse's neck, while others held on to his hind legs. Duke fought back, snorting and straining to break free. But eventually, he was subdued. The damage, however, was already done. The coffin's lid was completely destroyed, and the scene was so unusual that many people were slow to react. It was as though Duke's pain reflected something bigger, something no one there could explain. And little did they know that the fright they had just experienced was still not the end of that day's incredible events. While chaos still reigned in the cemetery, something entirely unexpected happened. After Duke had destroyed the coffin's lid, a heavy silence fell. The people, frightened and confused, tried to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Then, in the midst of that silence, they heard a faint sound, almost imperceptible, coming from inside the coffin. It sounded like muffled crying, as if someone were trying to call for help. For a moment, nobody believed what they were hearing. Some thought they were imagining things. Others stood completely still, not knowing how to react. But the sound persisted, now clearer. It was a low moan, but unmistakable. That was enough for Henry's family, who were closest to the coffin, to approach with wide eyes and pounding hearts. Suddenly, to everyone's complete astonishment, Henry began to move. Struggling, he opened his eyes, still disoriented, and tried to sit up. His breathing was labored, but he was alive. Alive. The people around him screamed in surprise. Some ran off in panic, while others, especially his family, stood frozen with tears in their eyes, trying to process what they were seeing. Henry appeared confused, as if waking from a deep sleep. He looked at the startled faces surrounding him and tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse and weak. "What's happening?" he asked, still unsure of where he was or why so many people were looking at him as though they had witnessed a miracle. His wife was the first to approach, crying with joy. "Henry, you're alive," she said, grasping his trembling hands. Meanwhile, Duke, who had been restrained just moments before, now seemed calm, as though he knew his mission was complete. He gazed at Henry with large eyes filled with an almost human tranquility, as if saying, "I knew you were still here." The family helped Henry out of the coffin and gently laid him on the ground, while a doctor who was present at the funeral stepped forward to assess his condition. Although weak, Henry was all right, and little by little began to regain his senses. The doctor explained that Henry had likely experienced a rare case of catalepsy, a condition in which the body mimics the signs of death, with breathing so faint it can barely be detected. It's extremely rare, but not impossible. Where fear had once reigned, relief and joy now flooded the people. Many were crying, unable to hold back their emotions. Others, still trying to understand what had happened, looked at Duke as though he were a hero. After all, if not for the horse's determination in destroying the coffin, Henry would have been buried alive. For Henry, it felt like a dream. He embraced his wife and children tightly, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding him. Catching sight of Duke standing nearby, lowering his head as if greeting him, Henry smiled and whispered, "Thank you, my friend. You saved my life." Henry and Duke's story quickly spread throughout town, and many said that what happened that day was a miracle. The bond between the man and the horse, already so strong, grew even more special. The experience not only saved Henry's life, but also offered a new perspective to everyone there. The idea that loyalty, love, and a true connection can triumph over even the darkest and most unexpected moments in life. The following day, a mix of relief and disbelief still lingered among those who had witnessed the event. People were eager to understand what had truly happened to Henry. To help clarify, a specialist doctor from a neighboring town was called in to examine him and provide an explanation. After a thorough assessment, the doctor gathered the family and began speaking. What happened to Henry is rare but not impossible. He experienced a state known as catalepsy. It's a condition in which the body enters such a deep state of inactivity that vital signs like breathing and pulse nearly disappear. To the naked eye, and even to less sensitive medical instruments, this can be mistaken for death. The family listened intently, still emotional, while Henry, seated in a chair, seemed to be trying to process everything as well. During catalepsy, the doctor continued, the body becomes rigid and motionless, like it's actually dead. That's why no one noticed he was still alive. It's a very rare phenomenon, but fortunately, reversible if discovered in time. As the doctor explained, everyone's eyes frequently turned toward Duke, who stood outside, peering in as if still concerned about Henry. It was then that the doctor mentioned something that left everyone deep in thought. What's most astonishing, though, is not just that Henry survived, but the role Duke played in it all. Animals have very strong instincts and often sense things that we humans can't. It's possible Duke felt that his owner was still alive, even when everyone else believed otherwise. These words brought tears to Henry's eyes. He already knew Duke was special, but realizing that the horse had been crucial in saving his life filled him with gratitude. The connection between them was so deep that in some way Duke seemed to have understood something was wrong and acted to prevent Henry from being buried alive. For a few moments, the family sat in silence, absorbing everything that had been said. Then the doctor continued, "It's amazing to see how loyalty and love between an animal and its owner can overcome even the most difficult situations. Duke not only saved Henry, but also showed us the power of true connection. It's something science can't fully explain, but that we can all feel." After hearing this, Henry asked them to bring Duke over to him. When they led the horse inside, Henry embraced him like an old friend. With a voice still hoarse but filled with emotion, he said, "You're more than my horse, Duke. You're my family. Thank you for never giving up on me." From that day on, Henry and Duke's story was told throughout the region. It wasn't just about a man who survived a rare condition, but about the strength of a bond that saved a life. Duke's loyalty demonstrated that love and instinct can be as powerful as any form of medicine. And for Henry, every new day beside Duke was a reminder that, even in the most unlikely circumstances, life can surprise us with miracles. Duke, the foal once considered a lost cause, was now at the center of an extraordinary story. He arrived at Henry's farm, frail, sick, and written off by others, but he found something there that no one else had given him: love and hope. Henry didn't see just a sick animal. He saw a living being who deserved a chance, and with dedication, patience, and affection, he transformed that little foal into a majestic, healthy horse. Over the years, Duke became much more than just another farm animal. He was Henry's inseparable companion, the loyal friend who followed him around the fields, the silent listener to his worries, and his partner in morning chores and afternoon breaks. Duke seemed to understand Henry in a way few people could, and it was this deep bond that made him not just Henry's best friend, but also his savior at one of the most critical moments of his life. When everyone else believed that Henry was gone, Duke refused to accept it. It was his intuition, his connection with his owner, that drove him to act in a way nobody anticipated. He not only prevented Henry from being buried alive, but he also showed the world just how powerful a bond based on love and trust can be. Duke knew nothing about medical diagnoses or rare conditions like catalepsy, but he knew in his heart that Henry was still there, and that was enough to save him. This story quickly spread, touching the hearts of all who heard it. It wasn't just about Henry surviving or Duke's heroism. It was living proof of the incredible connection that can exist between humans and animals, something that transcends words or scientific explanation. It spoke of how love and empathy, when cultivated, can create bonds so strong they can withstand even the toughest situations. Henry always said that Duke wasn't the only one who had been saved. In a way, they had saved each other. The horse was given a second chance at life when Henry rescued him from a farm where he would have been put down. Years later, Duke repaid this act of love by preventing his friend from being buried alive. It was as if fate had brought them together so that together they could overcome any obstacle. Henry and Duke's story is a powerful reminder that dedication and care can work wonders. No matter how grim the circumstances may seem, love has the power to transform lives. Whether it's saving a sick foal or being saved by a loyal horse, this lesson rings true. Never underestimate what empathy and connection can achieve. For Henry, every day with Duke was a celebration of life and true friendship, a testament that, even in the darkest times, there is always room for light and love. And so ends this incredible story of love, loyalty, and perseverance between Henry and Duke, proof that the bond between humans and animals can be stronger than any obstacle. If this story touched your heart and made you think about the power of empathy and dedication, leave your comment down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this very special connection. Don't forget to like the video. It helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to others. And of course, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any more heartwarming stories like this. Thank you for staying with us, and see you next time.